Hello and welcome to Meet the Boss, our new series in which we get to chat with key partners and sponsors and find out a little bit more about them, what made them get involved with our sporting group, but also how they've been coping and transforming their businesses through the coronavirus pandemic. Well, today I'm pleased to say that I'm joined by UWE Bristol's Vice-Chancellor, Professor Steve West. Hello to you, Steve. Been very, very busy, I know, with the building of the Nightingale Hospital, and we'll come on to that in a bit. First up, I call you Professor, so what are you a professor of?
So I'm a professor of health and podiatric medicine, which sounds very fancy, but it's basically a foot specialist.
Well, so your background is in medicine, foot specialist. Well, I tell you what, we have a lot of injuries here in the sporting world. Foot specialists are always in demand. And I think actually, is that that's one of your links, isn't it, to the sporting world, I think, in your early career?
It is. When I first graduated, I worked at Barts in London and Homerton and Hackney. And at Hackney, we set up with a physiotherapist and an orthopaedic surgeon, a specialist sports injury unit. And every Monday, usually over the lunch hour and between clinics, we ran a 2-hour specialist sports injury clinic to pick up all the Sunday league players that had been injured. And rather than then clogging up the emergency departments, we decided to have this specialist clinic free to anyone who turned up. We would see them, treat them, and if they needed further ongoing work, then we would do that as well. So it's a fantastic way of just engaging with sport.
Goodness me, I bet it was a busy clinic in London on a Monday.
It was a very busy clinic, but they were all sports injuries and they were real injuries. And so we, it meant that we got them when they were reasonably acute, which is great because then you can really start to work with them. So we obviously saw most of the young kids that were coming through. So we tended not to see too many 50, 60-year-olds, but the other end we were seeing lots of.
That's quite interesting. How did the progression happen then from the medical world into the world of academia?
That's a really good question. So as a clinician working in the NHS, I used to do a lot of support for students as they were in their education. And then I started to do research on the diabetic foot in particular, which was a speciality. And I started then to lecture on that research. And then I got drawn into doing more and more academic work alongside the clinical practice, and then got sucked into a university. And that was it, off on a career path within a university. But I still am on the register. I can still practice, and I still do a little bit of work. So I'm keeping my hand in or my foot in, as you might say.
Well, certainly in terms of your links to the NHS, I guess it is the perfect point to reference, of course, anyone that had missed it, the UWE handing over its exhibition centre to be transformed into one of these incredible Nightingale hospitals. Yeah,
it was a truly remarkable feat, really. It happened, I got a telephone call the end of March, 26th of March, having put the university forward as a potential site. And the following morning, the 27th, a team arrived and we spec'd really what we wanted to be able to achieve within that hospital. And then it just started. 16 days of hard work, really hard work, to transform what was an exhibition centre into a 301-bedded intensive care unit. Fully ventilated, which is the only one of its sort in the country, actually, all fully ventilated. And a unit that also had with it, of course, all of the infrastructure that you need: car parking, transport, student accommodation. The students by then had left, so we had accommodation for staff. And a great way of bringing the NHS, the university and community together to create a facility that everyone hopes we don't have to use. But I have to say it's a facility that is there, and should there be a second or third wave, it will be there in order to support the NHS. And that's, I think, a fantastic thing that we've got available to us.
Yeah, I mean it's a remarkable thing to do, and I know, you know, here at the stadium, of course, we've turned over parts of the stadium for food banks and where we can help. And I think that's one of the key things, perhaps, that has come out of this pandemic is the number of companies, corporations that have stepped forward to try and help. It really has united a community.
Yeah, it has. And what was really interesting was that everybody was doing this and wanted it to work. And all of the tradespeople coming onto the campus to do all of this work, I mean, they were working 15, 16-hour days, 7 days a week. And they just gelled, they just did what they needed to do, they supported each other. And of course, they were people who were coming from right across the region. Um, and then we had also, as a university, to work through, well, how are we going to train everybody to be able to operate and work in that environment? So we also had 400 volunteers going through a training program at the university to prepare them to be able to work in that environment and to manage not just the clinical aspects, but also the emotional aspects that they would be exposed to, their mental health and well-being, their safety. And all of that's come together and was tremendous to see just the volunteers from across Bristol, all walks of life, volunteering to come in and help.
Yeah, yeah. I think that is one of the positives that we can take out of this awful pandemic. You've referenced there about the Nightingale hospitals and basically they're there to help the NHS cope. Obviously, we are hopefully through this first wave, but of course there is the possibility of this second wave. And I guess all of the Nightingale hospitals, I guess there's some doubt over to how many will be kept in place. And I presume the UWE one will be kept in place for the foreseeable future.
So we're hoping that will be the case. There's a bit of discussion to happen, but we're assuming as a university that the Nightingale is a facility that is going to be required, and that's the basis upon which we're planning. And of course, we should know whether that is the case in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I guess just to clarify that, I mean, obviously there was a lot of press around the London one and the leasing of space. In terms of your background, you know, as a Vice-Chancellor, you've also got to balance the books of UWE, but this is pretty much a peppercorn rent because this is the right thing to do.
So this is very much the right thing to do. We have a civic responsibility, and my view, of course, my background is health, so that's, you know, often where my heart sits. But this isn't about the money. This is about making sure that we've got a facility that provides hope, and that's a really important word: hope for staff and hope for patients. That we've got something that is there as a backup if it's needed. And I took the view that, and my board agreed that, you know, we would do this for £1, and that is a peppercorn rent, and we will work with the NHS for however long we need to, just to make sure that this all comes together.
Yeah, well, it's an amazing offering, and the city is glad to have you doing your bit, so to speak. It's an amazing offering, and having seen the footage of it, it is an incredible facility. Yeah, let's just hope we don't actually have to have it to full capacity. In terms of UWE and your background, obviously you've been Vice-Chancellor there for more than a decade. There's been a lot of changes in that time. You know, UWE has gone from what was a very small and if you don't mind me saying, you know, very much the second University of Bristol. And actually, you're the disruptor, aren't you, in the city?
Yeah, it's always good to be a disruptor because it means we can innovate and we can be creative and we can do things that maybe others aren't quite able to do. But that said, the two universities work really well in partnership. So although there is this perceived rivalry, in reality, we complement each other. And we work together, and that's clearly going to be really important going forward. Both universities and Bath Spa working together collaboratively to really support not just the local region, but beyond. All of the universities are global in outlook and reach. We as a university, we sort of describe ourselves as for the city, with the city, and supporting the city, and that's really important. I think we're a regional university that really does engage with the schools, so we support the academy infrastructures. We're one of the principal partners for the Cabot Learning Federation, a multi-academy trust, and the Tiller Foundation. And that means we've got a large number of schools to support. And of course, we work very closely with the FE colleges and partners, creating pathways and opportunities, recognizing that for many young people, their route may be to university, but not necessarily. It may be through apprenticeships, it may be through staying at their local college to study for a degree, or even working with organisations like yourselves and having an education within a very different environment, and the university working in partnership to be able to deliver that. So, you know, I always used to say that actually there's no one way up a climbing frame. You can go up that climbing frame in a number of different ways. And therefore you must give lots of pathways for people to work out what's right for them to succeed, thrive and flourish in the world, and recognise that for many people they may not have been able to do it at an 18-year-old leaving school. For some, they may come back to university and education later. And I think the COVID-19 position that we're now in, there's going to have to be a lot of retraining and a lot of re-education in order to create the new industries of the future. And that's where I think universities like UWE really come into their own.
Yeah. Well, you talk about sort of developing pathways, of course, within our sporting group. I know that there's a number of our players that are involved in courses with you, and it is about trying to offer those combination courses almost where you can, you know, do your day job. So Dave Atwood, say, one of our Bears rugby players, or I know a couple of our Flyers basketball team, Daniel and Marcus Delpeche, Daniel Edozie and Marcus Delpeche are all studying with you, and it's being able to juggle those demands of a full-time job, if you like, with full-time education.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, they're elite athletes, and that, you know, getting that balance right is really, really important. But actually what you've just said in terms of the complexity now in higher education, you know, most of our students are working. It's very unusual for a student to come to university and not need to work and create funding to support themselves. So that complexity is really something we have to address for the entire university population. Your guys are, you know, just incredible, because they're balancing keeping their performance high, keeping in training at the same time as studying. And of course, in the period that we're going through at the moment, that's been really tough for athletes in terms of their training regimes, in particular, and keeping their fitness levels up. And you know, we've had to find creative ways of being able to do that, because the normal ways have been, you know, shut down.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the guys juggling and the women juggling their full-time training with this. I spoke to Daniel Edozie the other week, and he said, I said, how are you coping with lockdown? And he said, yeah. He said, we've actually just taken it as a bit of a break, because they won't probably come back till, you know, September, October time, the BBL. So he said, it's been great because I've had a really good chance to finish off my dissertation.
Good.
So well, it's always good to take the positive.
Yeah.
yeah, he's very happy about that. Now, I know we've just talked about some of the student pathways, you know, from our, if you like, from our sporting group to you. But of course, that's been working in reverse actually pretty much since day one, since I joined. I think we've been in partnership for about 6 years now, taking your students and giving them the opportunity to do sporting filming and being part of our film team on match days.
Yeah, really, really important. We're a practice-led university, which means that the education we want to provide for our students is obviously theoretical in part, but actually it's about the application of that theory to practice. So things like internships and placements, working with our local business communities, is really, really important. It makes the students, I think, better graduates. I think they learn a huge amount from being in a business industry setting, and it adds value to their education. And that's something that, you know, clearly COVID-19 is a bit of a disruptor, but we want to ensure that as students start to think about re-engaging with the university in September, October, those are the things that we want to keep. We want students to be able to access facilities. We want students to be able to access the labs, so the studios or the skills laboratories or studios around the campuses, obviously in a controlled way. but we also want them to be able to engage with our academics and be safe if they're going out onto placements. And basically, it is about us all taking our own responsibility for health and safety, so following all the public health advice, and then being sensible, because actually no organisation could completely legislate and put in all sorts of barriers. We've got to accept the responsibility for ourselves. Otherwise, what happens is you end up having to dilute the experiences and the education, and I'm not prepared to do that. It's about trust and respect and people working in communities to be safe. And if we can get that, then we've got more freedoms. And obviously, I'm still part of the NHS, so we watch very carefully how the hospitals and how that dreaded R number starts to move, and you adjust as you start to see those movements. So the start of year should be one where it's different. There's not going to be big freshers fairs and all the usual stuff, but we will continue to work these partnerships, and we will want to continue to support students to be in those fantastic settings like yours, where they learn so much, and that's really important to them. So yeah, we've got to find new ways of doing things, but let's not lose the great stuff that we've done.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a number of course, it's not just the returning students. I guess you mentioned there, Freshers Week. It's all of that part of that first year of university education that, you know, I think there's a lot of sadness for people thinking of people going away to university and thinking that is, you know, we keep talking about the new normal. There is going to be a new normal.
So absolutely right. We've got to find a way of using technology creatively to provide a different sort of experience. So what's really interesting is I've got five kids, and their use of technology to stay in contact with friends has been, you know, remarkable. Multiple devices going all at the same time. I don't quite know how they manage it, but they have, and they do. And they find a new path to connect up. Now, what we have to do in the university is not interfere with that. That's their social space, and that's what they should continue to do. But how do we learn from that and create those opportunities, especially for the new students who need to build friends really, really quickly and need an infrastructure and a support? So we've been thinking hard about how do you create a soft landing into the university for the first 4 weeks, and we're calling that our Block Zero, where students will have an opportunity to meet each other, work with each other in virtual environments, meet the staff, obviously, work with staff, have coaches. So we're learning interestingly, we're learning a lot from sport. So personal coaches and supporters as part of their mechanism to guide them through the university. And these are different from the academic tutors. And then also alongside that, making sure that they've got the equipment that they need. What we think that young people are, you know, digitally connected and savvy, and they are to a degree. Mobile phones, yes, but other technology, not necessarily. So they don't have necessarily the equipment. So we're going to have to make sure that we've got that in place so that they're not disadvantaged in any way. And then, of course, thinking about the halls of residence and making sure that students who are going into our halls, sharing accommodation, are safe and are working almost like family units and being a mini community in their own way. And the same if they're in the community sharing houses. So there's a bit of education that we need to do. There's a bit of setting boundaries and making sure that they act responsibly and support each other. So basic stuff of public health, and also recognizing that if one starts to become ill, then the whole unit has to isolate, and we will support them in that isolated bubble.
I've spoken to many CEOs and managing directors during this lockdown, and they've all talked me through their transition of their workforce, you know, upskilling the workforce to all have, you know, remote working. And it does strike me, you know, as a mother of children that are being home educated via the power of technology and all the work that the teachers are doing behind the scenes to get them all connected and be able to sit their exams and various things. It strikes me that actually universities have probably got the toughest job with this, because not only have you got to upskill and make sure people have got the technology and the equipment, but you're coping with people living on your campuses.
So just to set that in context, I describe the university like a small town. It has all of the features of a small town. So we've got living, we've got sports, we've got leisure, we've got lots of, obviously, lectures and seminars and all of the other stuff that you'd expect to see in a university, plus a research and development arm and a commercial arm. So you put all of that together and you've got lots of spinning wheels that need to come together in a sensible way. And of course, you're dealing with adults. So in that space, you have to respect that people are going to have to make decisions for themselves around their own safety and ways of working. We can't take that over. In schools, it's a little bit easier. They tend to be slightly more structured, and they're focusing on one thing. So we're fairly broad. So I've got 30,000 students and about 4,500 staff. So that puts it in context. So working out how do you move those sorts of numbers around at any moment in time, and recognizing that social distancing is going to need to be in place and all of that other stuff that's there. And it's a logistical nightmare, I have to say.
Yeah, as someone that's, from a stadium of nearly 30,000, trying the logistical nightmare, I'm with you on. And, all of us want to have crowds returning sooner rather than later. But, trying to safely manage that, we realise is going to be a long haul. I guess the only difference for us is the behind closed doors and how we can bring, the sporting fixtures into people's lives via that.
Yeah.
We referenced that you guys are a new partner. Say that again.
I was going to say that makes a big difference. Switching that sport bit back on is going to be huge, I think. So well done, and thank you. Thank you for working to get to that point.
Yes, there are many people in the organisation that have been working extremely hard to get that, with football and obviously news of rugby as well. Hopefully both returning in the next few weeks. I mentioned that you were one of our newer partners. I think you guys joined us in January in terms of the partnership involved. And you mentioned earlier about sort of positioning, you are very much a university for the city. It's interesting that you have chosen this partnership because, of course, your perimeter advertising, I see it flash up all the way through games and stuff of UWE. And is that positioning in that you are for the city?
Yeah, absolutely. So for our students, 50% will come from the city region. And what's really interesting is when students have, wherever they've come from, come through the university, a high proportion of them will remain in the city. So they make their lives part of the city. And that's really important. So the work that we are doing in terms of outreach, in terms of working with organisations like yours, is about saying to our city region, our young people, let's work together. Let's find your path and let's work together to ensure that you thrive and flourish in the future. And if you come to UWE, that's great. But if you don't come to UWE, that's also fine, as long as we've helped you on your journey. And therefore, recognizing how to connect with young people and where to connect with young people is hugely important. And we know that sport in particular is a great leveler. It's a great place for people to socially mix and identify. Music and culture similarly. So rather than just thinking in sort of tramrail, well, let's focus on the academic, it's about what are the vehicles that we can use to capture and inspire people to think about their futures and to think about education. And that's why this partnership is so good. It provides, opportunities for our students, clearly, but it also provides opportunities for the clubs to reach out into communities, to spot talent and to nurture that talent, and also to recognise that for many, even the elite sports people will have a finite time being an elite sports person, and then will need to build like their next career after that. So how do we support that bit of the journey as well, to make sure that they are elite sportsmen, that we want them to get to where they can get to, and then also at the same time have an eye on, well, what happens after that? And that's a really important part of this, I think, as well.
Yeah, listening to you talk as well, it strikes me that I think having I've spent quite a bit of time abroad, and it seems that the UK has actually played catch up in terms of how the further education system, particularly universities, recognise their sporting students. For many years now, England has been losing talent to America. Now, over the last 20 years, more to Australia. Where actually universities are attracting. I know that when you guys first came on board, it was a real sort of. It feels like it's a reverse of that now. Of course, with the advertising, of course, you're attracting a global audience by being, say, on during a football game or a rugby game. Is that something that you would agree with in terms of we've been slow to catch up, but actually that momentum is changing?
We have been slow to catch up, and where the UK, I guess, did it well, places like Loughborough and Bath, so universities that had got centres for elite sports, they were attracting. Most of the other universities were more about community sport rather than elite sport. Slowly, over time, what's beginning to happen is the elite sport is also being recognised and supported. And there is this challenge and balance in all universities around managing sport and engagement for the mass part of the university, as well as providing specialist support, space and access for elite sports people. And the best way to do this, I have to say, is the sorts of partnerships that we've got with you, where there is an infrastructure for those elite sports people to be connected into. So it's difficult if the university is trying to do it on its own, but you actually, in partnership, can do quite a lot. And in a previous period of the university's history, we worked very closely with Hartpury College. And Hartpury College was an affiliated faculty of the university, and they obviously have a huge sports focus. And that, to some extent, probably meant that we limited what we did at UWE, because we didn't want to compete, because they were part of the university. It didn't feel right. Now they're a university on their own. Of course, now we've got more opportunity and more space to not worry about that competitive piece.
Yeah, well, and I know we have some notable graduates from Hartpury College as well. And as a former Loughborough student, I couldn't agree more, because it was, it was the sporting background was the reason I went there, but, to study English. Listen, it's been fantastic to talk to you, and really, really interesting. And I couldn't agree more about, the whole idea of Bristol becoming this hub. I think there is so much talent that could be attracted here. And I think, we talk about a city, but a city of hope as well. And I hope to hopefully host you here at a game in the not too distant future.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
Well, that's it from Meet the Boss for this week. Hope you've enjoyed hearing about UWE Bristol and the incredible work that they've done in transforming their exhibition space into one of the Nightingale hospitals to help us as a community cope with the coronavirus pandemic, and also all the unique opportunities that UWE Bristol is offering its students. Until next time, goodbye.